Hey guys, and welcome back to Associate Tribe. I'm really excited because today we have with us Abby Gordon, and she is a director at Lateral Link in the New York office. But before she was a director there, she was a corporate associate for 7 years in New York, but also in the London and Paris offices. And so it's really exciting to get to talk to someone that has done what I think many of us have always dreamed of doing, which is working overseas in other offices. Abby, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to begin by talking a little bit about where you went to law school, how you decided on the law firm that you originally started working with.
Absolutely. Well, I went to Georgetown University Law Center in Washington, D.C., and I went through the whole on-campus interview process at the beginning of my second year of law school. And I had a little trouble at first deciding whether to prioritize Washington, D.C. offices or New York offices, but I was given advice by multiple people right at the last minute that I should really prioritize New York if I wanted to do the international corporate work. I knew I wanted the possibility of working overseas, and I also wanted a strong international platform in New York. So I chose Cleary because they have a very strong LATAM practice in New York, and I would also have the possibility of going overseas.
It sounds like you had an international focus before going into law school, and then maybe an international focus while you were in law school. Were there any particular classes you took that sort of you think helped prep you for getting those opportunities later?
I did have a lot of overseas experience, both through study abroad and internships. So I knew it was something I definitely wanted to pursue, or at least have that door open to me in law school and in a legal career. I actually don't think it matters what you take in law school. I think your first year classes are what really matter, and those are dictated for you anyways. You want to get as good grades as you possibly can, but what classes you take, I don't think really makes much difference. That being said, I was in a global law scholars program at Georgetown, which it was something I was selected for before I even started as a first year, and I ended up doing 2 study abroads while in undergrad and also while at law school. So I had a lot of study abroad experience. I think that was more important in terms of opening my mind and the networking and those experience than in terms of what it looked like on my transcript.
And you said that at the time when you were going through these OCI interviews, Cleary Gottlieb was a firm that was known for having a strong overseas practice. Was that one of the only firms at the time, or were there several firms that were known for giving associates those chances to work outside of the States?
A lot of firms offer those opportunities. It tends to be the top international firms overall, which is good news if you have good grades and you're able to get into one of those. It's unfortunate that for students who may not have as good grades or may not be coming from as prestigious a law school, it is a little difficult sometimes to find those overseas experiences. One thing that drew me to Cleary in the 16 or so callbacks I had, that equates to probably 100 or so 20, 30-minute interviews, and only one out of those 100 people, and it was a Cleary partner, actually tested my Spanish to see if I spoke the language. So that gave me insight, oh, I might actually be using my language skills here. Whereas I think for some of the other firms, certainly many firms do have overseas opportunities, but you also have to be careful as a law student to take what the firm websites say with a grain of salt, because those are more geared towards potential clients and not towards potential associates. So they may be blowing out of proportion some of their international work opportunities. Most of the opportunities overseas for US associates are for capital markets. And if you're not doing capital markets, or you're doing more regulatory work on the securities side, it's going to be very difficult to get overseas. There are some exceptions. There are some international arbitration associates in Paris, for example, but that's a very, very difficult field to get into. There are some private funds, fund formation associates working in Hong Kong and elsewhere in Asia. You might have some project finance associates who are particularly based in New York or in Washington, D.C., but who are working on Latin American matters. But best way of assuring yourself an opportunity to go overseas is to do capital markets work. Just by chance, I ended up chatting with the partner who delivered my first year review and was telling him that I was working on a pro bono matter where I was translating, interpreting for the client who spoke French. And I saw all of a sudden the partner's ears perk up. Wait, you speak French? Would you want to go to the Paris office for a short-term assignment? And I was hesitant because I always thought to go to the Paris office, you needed absolutely fluent French and you needed to commit to several years. But he was giving me the opportunity to go over for just a few weeks on a temporary assignment. So I said, absolutely, I'll do it. Well, it's funny because people think that you go to Paris and you're subject to that 35-hour work week and there, 8, 10, 12 weeks of vacation. And that's not really the case for U.S. associates. You're still working primarily with U.S. partners and even the French partners they know they're at an international law firm where some of these labor laws don't apply. Officially, our Paris office is more business attire. So I did end up bringing a lot of suits over, but realized actually it's a little bit more business casual, at least for women. We were mostly working with European clients. So generally, the hours were the same as they would be in New York. Lawyers tend to get in a little later, at least in New York and Paris, give the clients a little bit of time to get settled before we start bugging them, and because we tend to work late. So I would usually get into the office around 9:45, 10. But when I left was anyone's guess. I mean, never before 7, but sometimes I didn't leave.
Right. So that day just kept going.
Exactly. Even though you're expected to be on call all the time, the actual face time in the office was probably more important during the week than it would be in New York, but less important on the weekends. So I worked a lot from home on the weekends or from wherever I happened to be, but I didn't often come into the office on the weekends. And I think the clients respect holidays a little bit more in Europe than they do in New York. The ideas, the expectations, and the benefits and the compensation are the same. There were a few differences in the benefits, fairly minor ones in general, some pros, some cons to being in the Paris office. But the big difference was that we did have a protected exchange rate, and that every firm does it differently. And even at Cleary, it seems to change every year and change with each new associate who goes over to a foreign office. But generally, we get some sort of protection against fluctuations in the exchange rate. It is the norm in Paris to take a break and go out to lunch. Certainly a number of the French lawyers and eventually I joined in would have, a glass of red wine with lunch once in a while, especially on a Friday. Not anything unusual. French legalese and business French is very different. I was still learning a lot of these terms in English, let alone in French. So I do remember that the first few months were pretty exhausting as I was trying to learn all of these terms for the French versions of the terms on the financial statements and all this stuff I really didn't know yet in English either. You don't necessarily have to be native fluent. I certainly wasn't, and I still am not, but you do need to be proficient and be able to soon get up to a level of business or legal proficiency to work in that language.
What was the process sort of switching to logistically? So once you made that decision, you were going to make that internal move to Paris. Was it difficult getting all your things together, moving, the visa process?
The firm took care of the logistics of the the moving company and the visa, which was really helpful. Moving overseas is never easy logistically, but it's about as easy as it possibly can be when you move with a firm that's paying for your move. So Cleary was generous in that they gave us a moving allowance. They put me up in temporary furnished housing for a month and set me up with a broker, but then I had to find a place for the remainder of my time there that I was going to pay for myself.
You mentioned that you were working mostly with the US lawyers. I imagine it could have been difficult if you were being pulled in two directions, where you had all of your US caseload and then you also had French partners asking you to do projects.
So as a US or New York lawyer, you're still only practicing US law. You're not practicing French law. You're not qualified to, you wouldn't be authorized to. And with very few exceptions, there really isn't such a thing as international law, despite what most people come out of law school thinking. So you're practicing New York law, meaning that you're being supervised by the US partners. Now, once in a while, there's a project that's run by the French partners and they ask for your help, sometimes just because you're a native English speaker and they need that assistance, or you may have a particular interest in the subject matter or have worked with the client before. But I would say, 90% of my actual assignments came from the US partners.
While you were over in Paris, I think you said for about 5 years, did you get to travel a lot? Did you get to see a lot of Europe, other places? I know in your profile that you have a travel blog. And so was that born of adventures and trips that you were able to take while you were over there?
I did end up traveling quite a bit when I was over there. It's very easy to do weekend trips, either by train or the low-cost airlines like EasyJet and Ryanair. So I really did take advantage of that. I also had some really close friends in London and in Dublin, Milan, Madrid. So I was constantly either visiting them or meeting them somewhere where we could all get to for not too expensive. So I just got to the point where I got sick of constantly reinventing the wheel, sending people my recommendations for, a weekend in Madrid. What do you do when you come to Paris? Where should you go? Where should you stay? And I also felt, as a corporate lawyer in particular, that I needed some sort of creative outlet. So I always like to write. I always like to take photos. So I thought this would be a good way to have some sort of creative outlet in my life, and also something to do on those nights when it was past midnight and I'm waiting for somebody to send me comments and I need to do something to not fall asleep. It was something I could be working on.
One of the things that you talk about in your articles is that it can be difficult going from an overseas market coming back to the US market. And so if you could talk a little bit about that transition back to the States, what you ultimately decided to do and how sort of that process and that decision making happened.
I had been with Cleary for over 7 years by the time I was leaving, and I had a long time to think about what I was going to do next. I was really ready for a change. So I was lucky that I wasn't really trying to find a full-time legal job back in the US from Paris. But now, having worked as a recruiter for a number of years, I see that it's actually very difficult, that I would have had a tough time doing that had I chosen that path. Rightly or wrongly, firms assume that you're not getting the same substantive experience in an overseas office as you are in New York, where they think they have the most complicated and sophisticated of the deals, and certainly they're going to have a greater variety of work for U.S. associates than a foreign office will have, just because it's going to be a bigger office and more partners to work with. I think it's a great opportunity to go overseas, but I think for somebody who does want to have a legal career long term, who may want to be on partner track, I think it's best to go overseas when you're still pretty junior and come back while you're still a mid-level and not too senior. Firms do often dock you class years when you come back from an overseas stint. That's not the end of the world. Sometimes that's actually in your best interest, but it is something to be aware of, that's a possibility.
And so as the sort of final question of the interview, I wanted to ask what you would tell an associate or a law student looking to get into international law.
I would say start planning early, start talking to as many people as you can, whether it's recruiters or your career services people at your law school. For alums, remember that career services is there for you even as alums and not just as current students. And I think the most important thing if you want to go overseas is to pick your practice area carefully. And of course, if you're looking to go to Paris or Milan or somewhere where they don't speak English as their first language, you really need the language skills.
Well, Abby, thank you so much for coming on and for sharing with us all of your experiences working overseas. I know that that's something that a lot of people are interested in, and it's so great to be able to hear how that process went for you. And like I said, guys, I'm going to link her articles below, so please check those out. And thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you so much, Abby, for being here. If you guys liked the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe. Click that subscribe button, tap the notification bell, and you'll be able to get notified every time we release a video every Tuesday. So thank you guys for being with us. And Abby, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angela. It was really fun talking with you.